Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bounthone Chanthalavong. I'm the president of the ADL. The Alliance for Democracy in Laos is a worldwide network organization promoting a peaceful change for genuine democracy in Laos. It is a non-profit organization. The members are mostly Laotians living in exile in different countries all over the world, including USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, France, and others, where native citizens of the respective host counties join as active members and supporters. Many allied activists are in Thailand and Laos. We have obtained evidence directly from the Laotian population. Laos is one of the 5 remaining communist countries in the world and is one of the less developed countries in the world. Since 1975, Laos is a one-party communistic dictatorship. At the 2015 UPR cycle, the Lao People's Republic received 196 recommendations regarding the human rights situation from the Working Group of the Universal Periodic Report. The Laos government agreed to accept 116 of the recommendations, but in truth the human rights situation has deteriorated since then, despite promises to the contrary. The human rights situation is difficult to improve since the Lao People's Republic is largely politically led by Vietnam. China is largely responsible for economic control. It is therefore difficult to speak of real independence from Laos. Despite enormous natural resources and raw material deposits in Laos, the country is still one of the poorest in the world. The profits from the use of these resources flow mainly into the controlling countries and into the hands of a few powerful people in Laos. The main reason for this is the escalating corruption in the country. The corruption in the country in turn causes other problems, such as land grabbing and the destruction of nature. The institutions in Laos are against the principle and spirit of the Convention on Political Rights. According to the Laos Constitution in Art. 3, the Lao Revolutionary People's Party has the core leadership across the country. Thus, it is impossible for other organizations to work and exist. The same applies to other thinkers. It can be observed that the arrests of politically different thinking over long periods of time are unchanged. Although the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of the media, freedom of assembly and freedom of association in Article 44, this does not exist in reality. Many laws and decrees do away with the rights guaranteed in the Constitution. There are also major differences in the work of Parliament and the implementation of laws by the government. The population is hindered in the exercise of their human rights. Civil rights activists, but also simple inhabitants of the country, disappear or are imprisoned when they stand up for their rights. The freedom of expression, especially the freedom of the press, is hardly suppressed by the regime. Since the Decree No. 327 and others has been into act, it is hardly impossible to criticize the government or the party. Every critic now is a discretization of the system, so dissidents are sentenced up to 20 years in prison. Examples: in 2016, the 3 bloggers, Mr. Sukarni Chathat, Miss Lodgcom Tamavong, and Mr. Somporn Phimazone, were arrested in March 2016 and sentenced to 12, 18, and 20 years in prison for criticizing the regime on the internet in a petition to the government of Laos in front of the Lao embassy in Thailand, where they were migrant workers. They were not given adequate legal assistance and were publicly humiliated on Lao state television. Mrs. Hue Huang Zayibuli, 30, also known by her nickname Mue, was arrested Sept. 12, 2019 after she voiced her concern about the government response to flooding in the country's southern Champasak and Salavan provinces in her September 5 Facebook Live video. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison on the 22nd of November 2019 and fined 20 million Lao Kip, approximately $2,250. The citizens of Laos barely dare to stand up for their rights. As a result, the rule of law of the country is in danger. Decree number 218 prevents the work of NGOs in Laos. The government of Laos claims that more NGOs work today than ever before. But the fact is that neither human rights organizations nor political NGOs are allowed in Laos. Worse, regime critics are treated like criminals. Enforced disappearance and political prisoners has been routinely used through the years to shut off criticism and suppress dissent. The Somphone case from 2012 had already been addressed extensively in the last UPR cycle. Despite clear evidence of his kidnapping through a surveillance video at a police station in the capital, Vietnam, the government still refuses to provide any information. Since the last round of UPR, more cases of enforced disappearance have been added. The disappearance of the democracy lawyer Mr. Od Sai Vong in August 2019 has also not yet been clarified. Although the 34-year-old was recognized as a refugee by the United States authorities, Mr. Sai Vong was kidnapped in Bangkok and deported to Laos, according to testimony. Here are some examples. On November 14, 2019, regime critic Mr. Phet Phauthan Philip Hain disappeared without a trace in the capital Vientiane. On January 14, his friend in RFA reports that Mr. Philip Chan was arrested by the Lao authorities on charges that he stole a car even though his girlfriend said he couldn't drive a car. Another arrest in Laos without an independent judiciary. Of course, the government denies the presence of political prisoners. Even if international observers come to the prison, the political prisoners are immediately transferred. All political prisoners are in the prison of Phon Thanh and Samkha in the capital Vientiane. However, Samkha is now relocated to Tan Piro in the north of the capital. The land grabs in Laos still goes on. The politics of the Lao PDR has changed during the last years. The government will change the ground to capital. More and more areas are now owned by foreign investors, about 30%, most of them are from Vietnam and China. Here in the capital of Vientiane, we stand for our right on our property which was taken from us by the government. It has confiscated the property of the people in several provinces of the country and leased it to foreign investors for up to 99 years, regardless of the population. Now the government has made a new land right. The people has to pay more fees for their land rights certificates. The problem is the fee is more than the people have. Every village and every city has another fee. There is no national rule how much the people has to pay to the authorities. The land grab is a major violation of human rights. People lose their livelihood through no fault of their own. Often people are relocated to areas where traditional farming is not possible. The compensations are usually insufficient. Anyone who resists is arrested. An example of many is the case of Ban Yub village. 14 villagers were arrested, 2 of them are under the age of 15 and 1 other person has died. Some of them are still in custody. 2017, 14 villagers from Ban Yub arrested in Sekong Province. December 20, 2018 Province of Vientiane, Ban Sieng Da, City of Say Zeta. About 100 Laotians were taken away 50 hectares of land by a Vietnamese investor. July 2017, more than 50 families will be displaced from the village of Phoenixi in the Luang Prabang area. February 2017, the inhabitants of the village of Ban Hoak Soy are to be relocated for a questionable mega-project of a dam are recommendations. Initiate change towards a democratic system of government with multiple political parties, free, fair, and open elections, under the auspices and supervision of the United Nations. Respect the human rights of Lao people in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and comply with the treaties and conventions of the UN and other international human rights. documents to which the Lao PDR is a signatory, including the Freedom of Expression, for Assembly and others. Stop Decrees No. 327 and 238 to end the total media control by the party and to end the restriction of NGO in Laos. Relays all political prisoners in Laos, including Ms. Hue Huang Xiaobuli and the 3 bloggers, Mr. Sukarni Chathat, Miss Lodgcom Tamavong, and Mr. Somphorn Phimazone, as well as Mr. Phet and Philip Hain. Cease the forcible land grabs from Lao people and permanently terminate the selling of Lao lands and other national resources to foreign investors and other foreign interests. Thank you very much. I'll give the podium to Mr. Weiser.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Marcus Weiss. I'm the office manager at the ADL headquarters. 160 dams in the Mekong region are planned. China has already built 8 and planned 11 more. In Laos itself, there are currently 46 dams and 54 other projects. By 2020, a total of 100 dams are to be completed. Most of these dam projects are located in the tributaries, 11 of which are planned directly on the Mekong, 3 are under construction, the fourth has already signed the contract. Electricity accounts for about 2/3 of the country's exports. Laos has neither the technical expertise nor the resources to build the dams themselves. In the past 2 years, 2 dams in Laos have already been broken. After the last dam disasters, the number of victims count up to 6,600 people. The number of confirmed dead people is 40 people, a total of 31 people is missing. Unfortunately, the area now is restricted for international reporters, so no international observer can confirm this numbers. Compensations. According to our information, the government paid the victims in Sanam K city of the last catastrophe 100,000 Lao Kip per month as compensation. This sum is equivalent to $12. For the survivors of the dead, a sum of 1,700,000 Lao Kip have to be paid. This corresponds to a sum of $200. Unfortunately, not everybody of the survivors has seen anything of this money so far. Likewise, there is a great deal of dissatisfaction, because the compensation does not take into account who lost what, and all victims receive the same amount. On January 23, 2019, the Prime Minister's office issued a press statement stating that a Special Task National Relief Committee had approved compensation of $10,000 per person to families of those missing or killed during the disaster. Regarding various press reports, the victims are not very happy about the compensation. The international aid is more than $10 million. According to some reports that we have received from the population, some aid funds have disappeared into the corruption channels or have been misused. Now, 1 more year later, as a result, many people still live in emergency shelters and are poorly provided with relief supplies. But the consequences are even more serious. The primary damage that the dams cause is the disruption of fish migration in the rivers. The fish are no longer able to reach their spawning grounds and the fish population is decreasing steadily. Another secondary damage comes from a previously unthought of ecological planning. The dams create so-called stagnant waters that drastically increase the growth of bacteria. In conjunction with the tropical climate in Laos, these bacterians produce an unmeasurable amount of methane gas, a climate killer worse than CO2. But let's get back to the consequences of these dam projects. Initially, residents in the affected regions were and are often forcibly relocated without appropriate compensation. The deforestation and the resulting damage to the ground is now irreparable. The government promises that the profits from the projects will be invested in the development of the country. But since the financing comes from abroad, the profits go to 100% for foreign investors for the next 20 years. The only people in Laos to benefit from the projects are corrupt officials and politicians who misappropriate some money or are bribed. In order to further finance the projects, foreign investors have been offered mining concessions. The resulting mines not only cause further damage to the corridor, but also provide an aquaculture of the groundwater and the waters. However, what should shock the world public in times of climate change are the huge natural catastrophes that have happened during the last years due to the construction of the dams. Since then, flood disasters and massive dehydration of the rivers alternate in a constant rhythm, to an unprecedented extent. In the Mekong region alone, the livelihood of 50 million people is threatened. Forest cover in the country decreased from 49.1% in the year 1982 to 40.34% in the year 2010. This is less than 70% of forest cover several decades ago. In conjunction with further industrial activity, the decline in forest cover has transformed the country 1990 from a net CO2 sequester into a net issuer in the year 2000. Massive logs are moving to Vietnam every day, but it is absolutely prohibited for the people to use some wood for building houses. As previously reported on German, British television and later on in other television stations around the world, the wood that is largely illegally cut in Laos is brought to Vietnam. There it is used in the factories for furniture production and sold as a product from Vietnam all over the world to hide the wood origin from Laos. The Environment Investigation Agency EIA from Great Britain confirms this approach in the reports that have become known as Crossroads. Already a few years ago, ADL uncovered the careless handling of pesticides on the banana plantations in northern Laos with a hidden camera. In particular, the plantation workers and their families suffered from the poisoning and some died of a painful early death. After the successful ban a few years ago, this ban has now apparently been lifted. People get sick again from the pesticides. Profit is obviously more important than the health of one's own people. Our recommendations: 1. It's time to stop the projects, re-evaluate them, and seek alternatives. Other countries in Southeast Asia are currently focusing more on solar and wind energy. The UN should focus on awarding projects. 2. Collaboration with international environmental organizations such as Greenpeace would help to better assess and avert environmental damage. Of course, their suggestions must also be implemented. 3. The land grabs in relation to the dam projects has to be stopped, the people have to get an adequate compensation. 4. An independent commission of inquiry, identify and report the culprits for the disaster, and those responsible must pay the damage. We ask the UN for support. The population and independent NGOs need a say. 5. The environmental protection requirements for factories and agriculture in Laos require urgent revision. The construction of sewage treatment plants must be drastically strengthened. 6. Public control of all measures in Laos in connection with an observation by the UN is essential. Thank you for your attention, and to Mr. Feng Saksadi. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Feng Saksadi. I'm the local president of the Alliance for Democracy in Laos in Australia. Now I'll give you an overview about the foreign influences and their consequences in the matters of human rights in Laos. You know that since 1975 Laos has been ruled by the Lao Communist Party, known as Lao People's Revolutionary Party, LPRP, which in turn answers and reports to the Communist Party of Vietnam, CPV, in violation to the peace agreement of 1973, the year the civil war in Laos ends. The Lao-Vietnamese Friendship Treaty of 18.07.1977, which was then closed for 25 years and renewed every 10 years, guarantees Vietnam control over the Lao People's Republic. Directed by Vietnam, this regime arrested, imprisoned, and tortured former government officials, military and police leaders and officers, and regular citizens, numbering more than 80,000 people. Thousands of those people died, including the royal family. The Lao population was further reduced by the exit of more than 1 million Laotians who fled in terror and ended up as refugees without a country. Vietnam thus realized its hope towards eliminating the population of Laos. Over the years, this treaty has provided a cloak for Vietnam's gradual stealth control of Laos, starting with the military and political control. It legitimized the stationing of Vietnamese army troops in Laos to protect it against hostile or counter-revolutionary neighbors. The situation remains the same today despite 4 decades of stability. The only difference is that the Vietnamese soldiers are now out of uniform and act as advisors. So the Vietnamese have still the control about the Lao population. Today there are some 100,000 Vietnamese people living in Laos with a lot of privileges. On the political side, Vietnamese monitors sit in almost all the ministries in Vientiane. Hundreds of LPRP cadres and officials study Marxism-Leninism in Hanoi. Similarly, the Lao Politburo and other LPRP leaders as well as military officials regularly report to Hanoi. The worst and most disgraceful, or sinful, as we Laotians believe, act in Lao history by your Communist Party was the arrest of Laotians who loved the country and cared only about rights, justice, peace, and harmony. For that your Communist Party sent them to the so-called seminar camps which were in reality death camps. They were former government civil servants, military and police personnel, the king, the queen, the crown prince and other members of the royal family, and regular citizens numbering more than 80,000 were tormented and tortured. Many, including the royal family, died from inhumane treatment, diseases, starvation, torture and execution. The reappraisal of recent history in Laos is still split. The picture below right shows what we mean. On the one hand, the fallen Vietnamese are rescued from Laos and brought to Vietnam with heroic graves, but on the other hand the innumerable victims from the re-education camps are ignored. We think it's okay when a country commemorates its victims, but we believe that this applies to all victims, not just some. The influx of Vietnamese immigrants by the hundreds of thousands into Laos, documented and undocumented, with the tacit agreement of the Lao government under the weight of the Friendship Treaty, has crowded Laotians out of the business sector and the job market. The loss of their farms through land concessions and the depletion of wildlife food stock due to massive logging by Vietnamese companies are putting the survival of the rural poor of Laos at risk. Even now, Vietnam is still trying to take over Laos in many ways and forms. At every important level of the government of the Lao People's Democratic Republic there are Vietnamese technical advisors who are closely monitoring and tightly directing the activities of Lao officials. Vietnamese troops in and out of uniforms are stationed at the provinces and localities to intimidate Lao people from speaking up and from governing themselves. Vietnam has blatantly lifted our valuable natural resources for destination in Vietnam. Massive amounts of timber have been cut and transported from southern Laos to Vietnam for commerce under the supervision of the Vietnamese military, while Lao citizens are forbidden from cutting timber just to build a home. The same thing is happening with the valuable minerals that are being taken freely to Vietnam day and night. At the same time, Vietnam is looking for ways to destroy Lao culture and education. The leaders of the Lao People's Democratic Republic have been forced to allow the building of Ho Chi Minh monuments in many cities. Lao children are forced to learn Vietnamese in Lao schools all over the country. Historical Lao names of historical places are changed to Vietnamese names. Ho Chi Minh statues are now appearing in several cities in the country. More importantly, the borderline has effectively been pushed back into Laos by 15 kilometers and the once Lao towns and villages are now Vietnamese as reported by Radio Free Asia. For example, the towns and villages around the Sepon district in Savannakhet province. In these zones, Lao citizens cannot reside, do business and be employed. It is racial discrimination not against foreigners but against the Lao people in their own country. The Lao people who are not given a voice or a part in the decision-making, call it selling out the country. The Lao people are not part of the decision-making and the leaders are selling out the country. The last years the influence of China grows up. China got a lot of special economy zones, several megaprojects and more land concessions with soft land leases up to 99 years, the results are massive land grabs all over the country. So-called special economy zones and Chinatown with their own Verwaltung have been established. So 55,000 Chinese settlers have come to the special economy zone Buan Thal Wang, more than 300,000 settlers from China have come to the special economy zone in the city of Thanh Phuong, province of Boko. The result is that more and more Lao citizens have lost their home to the Chinese settlers. The pictures below show the casinos in the special economy zone of Boko. The Chinese railway project in Laos has consequences for the Laos farmers. The railway project that would link landlocked Laos with China has been touted as a benefit to the Lao economy because it will lower the cost of exports and consumer goods while boosting socio-economic development in the impoverished nation of nearly 7 million people. But the railway project, expected to be completed in 2021, has displaced more than 427 km from their land. Under Lao Decree 84 issued in April 2016, Laos citizens losing land to development projects must be compensated for lost income, property, crops, and plants. However, many of these families have still not been compensated. Plans now call for work on the railway to end in 2021, with Chinese companies promising completion by that date despite the challenges of boring tunnels in mountainous areas of the country's north. So now the Lao People's Republic has run into a debt of $6.4 billion. In the photos on the right, the economic zone in the south of Laos is the Mahanathi Zifandun megaproject designed for 50 years and is then to be extended for another 50 years. The contract was signed in 2012 and completion is scheduled for 2025. Chinese companies are investing some $9 billion in the Lao People's Republic. Both a large shopping center and a hotel for around 1.2 million tourists from China are to be built. Both projects were promised tax exemption and the settlement of 8,000 people. The Laotians in the area were forcibly relocated. It is therefore certain that this zone will only benefit foreign investors and Laotian politicians, but not the Laotian people or the country. Recommendations: 1. Stop robbing the people's lands for the benefits of foreigners, the selling of Lao natural resources, and the flood of Chinese and Vietnamese immigrants into Laos. 2. The friendship agreement between Vietnam and Laos must be reconsidered in the Communist Party and reassessed for its pros and cons. Afterwards we recommend an expiration of the contract with the year 2022. 3. In accordance with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, UPR, a demand for the rights for innocent Lao citizens taken away by the Lao People's Democratic Republic government after December 1975, the King of Laos, King Sri Savangvathana, the Queen Kamboi, members of the Lao royal families, members of the Lao royal government officials put in camps and died in the camps without decent ceremonial funeral services or burials for those who have passed. 4. UN needs to sanction on Vietnam for invading Laos and to stop LPDR to continue to govern the country before it is too late to recover from the damage made by the two countries only to serve for themselves with money in their pockets and nothing given to the country of Laos. Thank you very much, and now Mr. Michel Sayarath is the next speaker.
Economic boom in Laos only benefits those who can corrupt, but nothing gained by the poor can only suffer from oppression from absolute power one-party ruler Lao PDR. Sanctions need to be made to the countries which govern corruptively like the Lao PDR is ruining and damaging the country of Laos through their absolute power to sell investments for foreign countries. With no expert knowledge in the country to protect the interest of the people in their own country. Communism can be very corrupted because of the absolute power they obtain, and corruption is like a cancer disease which can only spread but can never be cured. The tax revenue from many of these businesses, for example the gold mines, unfortunately does not end up in the treasury, but in the private coffers of corrupt officials. Despite the rich natural resources, the huge mega project and the investments from China and Vietnam, the majority of the population of Laos remain poor. The pictures above show you what we mean. Most of the slave laborers are now in Thailand, about 900,000 Laotians as cheap labor in the neighboring Thailand. This is because there are not enough working spaces for the Lao people inside Laos. The most working spaces at the foreign project in Laos, especially the project from China and Vietnam, are mostly for foreign people, but slave labors are also inside Laos. The biggest example is the case of UPR2020 at the Salavan province, city of Phae Song, South Laos, in our former report. The coffee and rubber plantation under the name UPR2020 were built as economic unity for the party and government, so-called agricultural unit, but in truth, these are camp for slave labor. The people work in the rice and vegetable fields. The profit of the production must be handed over to the government. Anyone who does something against it will be arrested and killed. For foreigners it is forbidden to enter the agricultural camp. The Lao population in this area amounts to 60,000 people. For the people it is forbidden to travel to Vientiane province. This problem is actually handed them by the government. We've got informations by people from Laos directly. Another detail is the double tax payments by the Lao migrant workers. The migrant workers have to pay income tax in Thailand plus a lump tax paid to the Lao authorities about 2,000 THB $65 per year. Officially it is 300,000 kip. This is on 8,200 THB. The migrant workers have to pay it to the authorities by returning to their home. Most of these workers have a monthly income not more than $220. Although the government of Laos has repeatedly stated that it has taken action against the problem of drugs, we must realize that these are obviously not effective. We estimate that about one-third of adolescents are dependent on methamphetamines. These methamphetamines are mostly produced in Laos. A corrupt police structure prevents the fight against drug trafficking continuously, vocational hopelessness and the lack of development opportunities through vocational training, as well as the displacement of local workers by Chinese and Vietnamese workers, lead to an escape in alcohol and drugs. Laos officially has the highest per capita alcohol consumption in the ASEAN countries. Many children and teens come into contact with alcohol because there are no controls over the sale or dispensing. Alcohol sales to teenagers are not punished in Laos. Through the drug traffickers, many adolescents come into contact with so-called gangs of smugglers. Under false promises, the teenagers are then illegally brought to Thailand or China. If they are taken up by the authorities there, these young people are punished twice. While the smugglers usually get away with it or are punished only very mildly. Not only the youth are punished, but also the parents of the young people are provided with a fines. In the meantime, the construction of an express train in Laos has ensured that 19,000 jobs have been created. However, not for the Laotians. All the workers were brought in from China. Another 11,000 are to follow. The dubiousness of the benefit for the Laotian population is beyond question. It is also clear that some of these workers from China are supposed to settle in Laos and drive out the locals. Recommendations 1. We recommend that the United Nations Children's Fund work with the Women's Fund to help forced laborers abroad, as the government of Laos is obviously overwhelmed with this problem. 2. We want an investigation into Nicom 23 labor camp. 3. We demand the public control of the state budget. For this, Laos needs democratic reforms, which in turn must be supervised by the UN. 4. The three powers in Laos, judicial, executive and legislative, must be more clearly separated. A system change is therefore necessary. Thank you so much, and now give the floor to Mr. Polokang.
Ladies and gentlemen, My name is Paul. I am a ADL member. Now I'll inform you about the education system, field and infrastructure in Laos. The economic growth over the past 10 years has increased demand for workers of all skill levels. However, employers have difficulty finding the skilled workers they need. Following the creation of the ASEAN Economic Community, (IEC), at the end of 2015, Laos must ensure that the country's workforce is able to benefit from the new free movement of skilled labor. It is expected that skilled workers within the region will become increasingly mobile as private companies can now hire qualified staff from all ASEAN countries. It will be difficult for Laos to seize the benefits of the IEC if the country fails to adequately qualify its domestic workforce, while the rulers live in palaces. The students often sit outside in the classroom. This, too, is a consequence of corruption in Laos. In this respect, the country faces a number of challenges. In Laos, there are significant inequalities in access to education in the tertiary sector, especially for disadvantaged groups. It is difficult to start and complete a full professional and vocational training, however, given the high level of early school leavers after primary education. It is very important for the country to integrate school dropouts and early school dropouts into vocational training, however. There are significant shortcomings in the quality and relevance of the content being taught. The training standard of the specialist and vocational school teachers and the participation of employers in the vocational training system. The country's technical and vocational education and training system still does not function in a demand-oriented way, i.e., the content is selected almost without taking. As you can see from the pictures above, many schools in Laos are in poor condition. This shows that the government of Laos has not developed the education system in Laos sustainably. The healthcare system in Laos has been neglected and thus represents a human rights violation. International aid in the health sector has become partially ineffective due to corruption in the country and due to a lack of public controls. The poor people in Laos often do not receive treatment in doctors' offices and hospitals. The first question at the entrance is often about paying for the patient and not about therapy. Who has money in Laos goes to Thailand for treatment. Laos has 13,000 kilometers of road, but only about 1,700 are paved. There are mostly public beaches between the cities. The previously used trucks with wooden seats are gradually scrapped, otherwise, due to poor road conditions. Small trucks with longitudinal benches on the loading area are more likely to be found, so-called somtayus. Generally, there are very few private automobiles in the country. Even long distances are laid on foot. Common practice is driving by hitchhiker, mostly on the loading area of pick-ups. Outside Vientiane and Luang Prabang are mostly four-wheel driven cars. As the state of the roads is bad and waterways often have to be crossed by trails, in larger towns, the people, if they can afford it, use mopeds or bicycles during the monsoon season. When the rain falls from May to October, each path becomes impassable. Vehicles are no longer coming up the mountains, sweeping down the steep slopes, or sticking up to the axles in the mud. The remaining trucks sometimes block the road for days until they are excavated with a hoe and shovel and the sun has dried the land. Fords are rushing to trains after a heavy rain and can no longer be crossed. The floods are also tipping over a bus during the rainy season for almost half a year. Farmers have difficulty getting to the next market or administrative center. The economy is almost paralyzed. Children often cannot go to school. Women who would rather release in the hospital must give birth to their child at home. and take the risk of losing your life or that of your child. This state inhibits the country in almost all areas. Large-scale projects such as the construction of a high-speed train are therefore useless, that there are far too few possibilities to reach the railway stations. Often we also reported that public buildings are being built without thinking of the accessibility. Also, the development of building plots is considered insufficient. On the other hand, public money is often abused to finance private construction projects of the communist cadres, since direct criticism of the system or its institutions is prohibited in laws. A Laotian in the middle of the picture has taken a special protest. She started planting rice on the street because she thinks the street is not good for driving but for planting. Recommendations. First, instead of investing in the mega projects in the country that have no sustainability for the country, one should invest more in education, health and infrastructure. This not only brings long-term profit to the country but also to the investors. Second, international aid must go directly to the population without going through the government as long as corruption in the country is not under control. Thank you very much for your attention.